I know I'm not the only one who has pretty much split my life into a pre- and post-COVID timeline. In fact, I'm fairly certain that's the standard at this point. Not to imply, of course, that COVID is over, it's not, but life was different before March 2020 than it is now, no matter who you are. I remember in 2020, my resolution was to see one concert every single month of the year, which, shocker, was not possible. It's for that reason that ever since restrictions have lifted and I've felt safe going to concerts, masks on for the most part even today, I've been going to pretty much every one I can reasonably get to. I've seen some incredible artists in the past 2 years, and today I just want to take a second to look back and reminisce about all those shows that have made it all so exciting and worth looking forward to. I'll be doing this chronologically to today, and then at the end I'll brag a little bit about the shows I have planned for the year upcoming, because there's no shortage of things for me to be excited about. Also, I'm not really the type to record concerts, so I won't be using much of my own footage here. The background footage will all obviously be of the artists in question, but they aren't necessarily of the exact shows I went to. With all that, let's go ahead with October 21st, which is when I got to see one of my absolute favorite artists for the first time, and that's Backwash. It was kind of a weird in-between period where COVID was definitely still a thing, but the numbers had gone down for a couple months before, of course, they shot back up in January. Because of that, the show was moved outdoors to the patio, which I expected to be very weird, but genuinely, it still remains one of my favorite shows I've ever been to. It was for an arts festival here called Peak, so there were a few other artists beforehand who I forget at this point, but Backwash absolutely killed it and blew my mind with how interactive of a performer and natural of a showwoman she is, as well as how on point her live performance is to the studio recordings. The energy was absolutely insane, and when she played a remix of Devil in a Mosh Pit, it went so unbelievably hard that she played it again as an encore for good measure. The setlist was an awesome mix of songs from God Has Nothing and the then recently released I Lie Here Buried, as well as a couple tracks from Deviancy, which was a nice surprise. This also marked the beginning of my ongoing series of Boundwash photos, in which I get a picture with her every time I see her perform. I didn't get one of us after the show, but I also got to chat with her for the first time, and she is genuinely so sweet, and I always look forward to whatever time we can get to hang out after the show. About a week later, at the same venue, I don't remember the exact date, I went with some friends to an emo night featuring cover bands of Weezer, Jimmy Eat World, and Alexisonfire. In that order, funnily enough. Weezer was so fun, and I started a mosh pit to El Scorcho with the one other trans girl in the audience, which was incredibly funny, and that's about all I remember. And then, thanks to a new COVID variant, nothing until March, which happens to be the month I met my partner and we started dating. They're actually the one who gave me the idea for this video. Our first concert together was my third time seeing the Toronto punk band Pup. I haven't talked about them at all on this channel, but trust me when I say they're one of my favorite punk bands ever, and Morbid Stuff is up there for me alongside the greats of pop punk. Their live show in particular is what put me onto them in a big way when I saw them in summer 2019, and then once again a couple months later. I was obsessed. This time they had some of the most ridiculous energy I've ever seen come out of a crowd. We were right up against the barrier, and within a minute of the first song we'd been sucked right back next to the pit, which is where we stayed for the rest of the show. The setlist was pretty great, with a blend of material from their first 3 albums, and some songs from their then unreleased new album, which, while it may not be my favorite of theirs, was awesome live. My friend who went said it was the first time he'd ever struggled to hear a band over the audience singing along to every word. I brought home the record a few days before release, and also COVID, which is especially crappy because 2 days later, I got a ride up to Montreal for the first time to see Black Midi and Namdi. It's hard to say if me being in that crowd was a risk, especially because I was wearing a mask, and because of incubation periods and whatnot. And there's no way I could have known I had it at that point, but I still feel pretty bad about it. Nonetheless, the show was awesome. Namdi is someone I'm not overly familiar with, but the show they put on was high energy and fun as hell. Black Midi, as expected, blew the roof off. The stage was set up in a weird L shape, so the drummer was practically part of the crowd, and it just went ridiculously hard. They played what I think must have been like half of Hellfire, months and months before it actually came out, And of course, the Schlagenheim and Cavalcade material was awesome. My partner is still super disappointed they weren't at this one, so I'm really hopeful that they come back in the near future. And then in early May, we saw the show of a lifetime. For the first time in my hometown for 2 decades, Godspeed You Black Emperor played at their States End tour. After a ton of hassle with figuring out the tickets, I bought them something like 9 months in advance, well before meeting my partner. Everything lined up perfectly, and we got to sit together on the balcony with a fantastic view, and wow. There's a lot of competition that we'll get to later, but this may well be the best concert I've ever been to. I'm getting goosebumps just saying this out loud. They didn't even play anything off of the first 2 records, and only 1 song off of Slow Riot. But even then, the impact of seeing all of these musicians playing new renditions of songs I'd grown to love, some of which had even gotten me through quarantine in a major way, it was something magical that I don't think can ever be conveyed properly. It's just fantastic in every way. A couple weeks later, we saw one of the most unhinged lineups, which is, in order, post-metal band SOM, shoegaze band Dream Crush, underground rapper Wiki, and post-punk band Iceage. The first 2 I don't remember particularly well, but I do remember having a great time with Dream Crush. Wiki was a lot of fun, tons of energy, and a really unique personality that shines in his performances. Iceage was also a ton of fun. I'm not the most familiar with their material, but the energy was high, and I feel like the show got better and better as it went on. My partner got the set list, and as an escape from one of the biggest windstorms we've had in years, I'd say it went down pretty well. On my birthday the next month, June 4th, we went up for my first proper visit to Montreal, and after meeting one of my YouTube friends, Lily Alexandre, for the first time, we went to see Backwash again. Of the times I have seen her, this is definitely the best it's ever been. It was largely the same material as the previous time, but the indoor venue, the stage being a squared place dead center of the room, and the fact she'd had a lot longer to practice the material live made this a hit out of the park easily. I had also had longer to memorize all the lyrics, so you know my voice was shot the next day. I remember even catching the lyrics on Black Magic when she forgot them and her pointing me out, which was super fun. I got to talk to her for a lot longer after this show and got a much better Boundwash picture than last time. This was a great show that I still hold very close to me. The second of the 3 shows I went to that week, on the 6th, we went back to see JPEG Mafia at home. One of the weirdest venues I've ever seen a show at, particularly because on the tour poster it said the wrong town. But also, this is like the dad rock venue. Like, shows that I'm interested in almost never happen there. Napalm Death was supposed to play there once, but that was cancelled, so no, nothing really good. And honestly, as much as I love Peggy and he did a great job performing at this show, real talk, the crowd was not it. The crowd was like the whitest I've ever seen, which wasn't that shocking, but it was also so tall. Like, we had to go up on the side elevated point to see, and the sound where we were standing was terrible. Even so, I had a good time, and while my partner doesn't remember it all too fondly, I definitely do. And then the third show of the week, we went back up to Montreal to see Phoebe Bridgers, which was so special. I haven't been as obsessed with her recently, but Punisher remains an incredibly important part of my life, and her other material is up in the same place for me. I definitely cried at this show, and it helped me appreciate her new single at the time, Sidelines, which had me kind of emotionally devastated, if I'm being honest. The setlist was just flawless. There was not a single song missing that I would have wanted her to play, and for as massive of a crowd as there was, it still felt pretty intimate. I would have preferred it not to have been moved to an outdoor venue, but as it is, it was fantastic. My only other complaint is that, because the Astroworld incident had just happened, she was extremely cautious about the crowd and making sure nobody got hurt, which unfortunately led to what I presume to be the same person pretending to be hurt over and over and over for attention. I swear, she probably stopped the show and restarted songs like 4 or 5 times throughout. All said though, great show. And then a full month later, July 8th marks the start of what is basically my hometown's only notable music festival. It's 10 days of decent acts with one break day randomly thrown in. We make fun of it a lot for not being able to pull the best headliners compared to festivals in neighboring cities, but I actually vastly prefer it being a full week ordeal spread out because it means you almost never have to make tough choices about what bands to see when multiple are playing at the same time. Last year's lineup was a holdover from 2020, but unfortunately many artists dropped out and not enough artists could fill in. I still kept my pass from 2 years ago, but it was really disappointing to see acts like King Crimson, DJ Shadow, Billy Talent, and Deltron 3030 just not show up on the revised list. That said, I still had a very good time. Day 1 was a pretty fun opener with Tash Sultana putting on a fantastic show as a one-person band before bringing out their band for the second half. What was shockingly even more fun was Jack Johnson later that night, which my partner was ecstatic for and I was not. But then the show actually started and I couldn't help myself but have a blast. And I was shocked and a little embarrassed by how much of the music I already knew the words to. Day 2, we kind of wandered around for the first bit. Not a ton of note was happening, but the grounds are pretty cool anyways, and it was fun to explore. But that night we saw Fela Kuti's son, Femi Kuti, and it was unbelievably phenomenal. Like, the kind of energy you can only experience in a live setting. It was electrifying, it was emotional, and it was just magical. He closed with an encore of Fela Kuti's Water Get No Enemy, which was an all-time concert moment for me. Day 3 was pretty funny. Alanis Morissette was the headliner, and she did a pretty good job, played through Jagged Little Pill in basically its entirety, but she definitely seemed a little disinterested, if I'm being honest. The opener, though, was why we were really there. Garbage played, and what a show that was. Sure, their new material they played was kind of bad, but those 90s songs still go ridiculously hard, and to close out, they played You Look So Fine, which is maybe my favorite song they ever did, and mixed it with Fleetwood Mac's Dreams for an outro. Day 4 we skipped, because Marshmello and 3 Days Grace were the only notable names on the list, and then day 5 was Punk Day. We saw Millencolin, who went shockingly hard and are definitely underrated, Sum 41, which was awesome. I'm really surprised at the degree to which the band has still got it. And then Alexisonfire, which was pretty great, but we did leave early because I'd seen them before and we were pretty tired. Day 6 was Lucy Dacus, which was so good. It was in a large tent and she played a good chunk of home video and then the best songs on Historian, although I was disappointed by how little we got off of No Burden. Then we made our way to another stage to see The Tea Party, a Canadian 90s band who have this really recognizable alt-rock and grunge sound to them, and who my partner's a big fan of. It was such a fun show. The vocalist was absolutely obliterated. Apparently he smoked so much after the show that when he went to greet fans, he was literally incomprehensible. But nonetheless, he put on an amazing show, and they did some really fun mashups with songs by Bowie and U2 and more. Day 7 was one for the history books. We got there an hour before gates opened to see Run the Jewels and Rage Against the Machine, and it was absolutely worth it. We were front from the first moment and didn't move until almost half an hour after the show had ended. Run the Jewels was a blast. They played a ton of songs I didn't expect. Obviously, they were going to do a lot of stuff off 4 and 2, but they played a lot more stuff from the other 2 records than I expected. We were disappointed and kind of baffled that they played songs that have Zach De La Rocha, but he never actually came on stage to do them. But when Rage came on later that night, it all made sense. If you didn't already know, Zach completely destroyed his leg in an injury just a couple days prior, and it was really nerve-wracking seeing him get carried onto a chair where he sat for the entire show. Any worries we might have had about the show were immediately washed away though, and it is a 3-way tie for the best concert I've ever been to. The set list was impeccable, with only 1 or 2 songs I felt were missing, but in their place, a ton of deep cuts I thought I'd never get to hear. And at the end of it, my partner caught a Tom Morello guitar pick, and I was kind of jealous at first, if I'm being honest, but at the last second, right before we were about to leave after the show, I spotted a crumpled up piece of paper on the edge of the stage, and I bugged one of the security guards to get it for me. And that set list now sits on my partner's wall in the same frame as that guitar pick, sealed together forever. After that, it would have been basically impossible to top that for the rest of the festival, so we didn't even really try. The next day was my friend's wedding, so we missed TLC and Cleopatra. and the final day was the National, which we missed because we got a little bit too intoxicated at a friend's birthday party. It was worth it, though. After the festival was over, I didn't get to go to a single show all of August, although my partner went to another festival and also got to see Fleet Foxes, which I was really disappointed to miss. September 2nd, though, I got to fulfill my childhood dream, which I thought would always just be a dream, and I got to see My Chemical Romance in Montreal. Sadly, because I had bought tickets well before meeting my partner, they didn't get to go. Water Parks opened for them, and I hate that band. When My Chem came on, though, it was fire from front to back. They played most of the songs I would have wanted to hear, and while they did play more from Danger Days than I would have liked, they redid a lot of those songs in interesting ways that made them so much better than in studio. I was seated dead center of the middle balcony, so it was a perfect view, too. Later that month, we went back up to Montreal, this time with my partner and a few friends, and saw Father John Misty. I love a good chunk of his music, but I'm definitely not the most well-versed, having only heard most of it once. But wow, we had a blast there. The light show was incredible, he's such an excellent performer, and he had a huge band behind him, which gave it this really full sound. We were right by the soundboard too, which was great, and led to us getting easy access to the set list at the end of the night. A couple of weeks later, we were back up to see Billy Woods, and I had no idea what to expect. The opening act was rap duo Shrapnel, who I had never heard before, but man, they put on a good show. It was super energetic and interactive and smiles the whole way through. It was so much fun. Billy Woods is obviously a pretty private dude. There aren't really any pictures of him out there, and I'm not going to show his face in this video, but honestly, he looked basically how I expected to, and he put on a fantastic show. It was an interesting vibe because his music, for the most part, doesn't go hard per se. It's very abstract and cerebral, so I experienced the show in a very similar way to how I do in studio, where I'm just focusing on the lyrics and what he's trying to put out there. It was a great time, and I feel like I got a much better understanding of the meaning behind his last two records. I even managed to get in line fast enough for a copy of Aethiopes on vinyl, which I swear there cannot have been more than like 14 of it in that box, so I'm super grateful for that. A few days later, we were back home, and Impulse bought tickets to see Iron Maiden, and wow, what a show. We didn't get the best seats, but they were not remotely bad either, to be honest. Second balcony in the corner, so we were relatively close to the stage without being on the side where the sound totally sucks. The band still puts on an amazing performance all around, and for a dude who's had throat cancer, Bruce Dickinson has absolutely still got it. It was a bit of a weird set list, but I don't really have any complaints. I don't like their last album all that much, but they got the 3 songs from it out of the way first, which gave them time to iron out their audio issues by the time the good material came out. They also played 2 songs from the Blaze Bayley era, which was very funny, but also kind of epic to hear them done by Bruce. They're so much better live that way. Also, the visuals of the show were unbelievable. Between like every other songs, the lights would go down for like 45 seconds, and when they came back up, the entire stage had been rearranged into a different setup with different structures and everything. And of course, there was a giant Eddie costume, which can't have been any shorter than 10 feet tall. Ridiculous show, and I'm really glad we got to see them. They were one of those bands I always worried I'd never get to see, so I'm happy that that's no longer the case. Coming up on the end of the year now, my partner couldn't make it this time, sadly, as they were off doing something far more important in Toronto. But I got to see Backwash again at home. This was for the launch party of her latest album, and it was awesome. She didn't really play anything from her older stuff, instead just playing every song from the new album, and then repeating a couple for the encore. Still, those new songs are fantastic live, and especially the Pupil Slicer one went so hard, I'm pretty sure she played it like 3 times. Also, the opener Jody Jody Roger was fantastic, some of the best energy from a small show, and totally primed us. I don't know if it's something I listened to in studio, but live it was just so good. I got to meet her after the show, and she's such a sweetheart. Of course, I got a third Boundwash photo and got to chat with her a little bit about the process of making this recent album too. Later that month was a show I'll never forget. It was a bit of a nightmare getting there. It was in Montreal, and our key to the Airbnb didn't work, so we were almost late, missing the opening act, but After all that stress, we managed to not only see the smile, but get to almost the perfect spot. I swear, my partner and I must have been less than 20 feet away from Tom York and Johnny Greenwood. And the experience was, again, nothing short of magical. It was a tiny venue. I think the capacity is something like 2,000. And the scene was so intimate. Obviously, I wish I could see Radiohead, but the Smiles material is so good that, of course, I can't complain. And they played new material that tells me the next album is going to be even better than the first. We left completely bedazzled and in utter disbelief at what we'd just seen, and it's a special show I don't think we'll ever forget. And finally, on December 18th, the last show of 2022, and as of now, the most recent concert we've been to, we were blessed enough to get a chance to see Lingua Ignota before she hangs up her hat and ends the project. Words cannot express to you what happened in that room when she performed. There are things that I saw that it would feel borderline blasphemous to record or even describe in such a public fashion. What I will say is that every second of the performance felt like a new spiritual awakening. The first set she performed entirely on the grand piano that we just stood a foot or two away from the base of, and she sang mostly renditions of traditional hymns, but also some immensely beautiful solo performances of Caligula songs. When she came back out for her main set, though, it's when the magic truly started to set in. She walked in, not onto the stage, but instead directly into the crowd. She disappeared in an instant, and we all waited until after a long minute of silence, she turned on a single tall stage light and began performing to the crowd, which formed a circle around her. It felt religious. After a time, she came back to the stage, and I kid you not, she stood and sat what cannot have been more than 6 inches away from us for the entire remainder of the show. I know I've said that a lot of things are the best show I've ever been to in this video, but I think for right now, this takes the cake. It's such a magical experience and a perfect cap-off to an amazing year of shows. So what do I have planned for this year? A lot, actually. In a couple days, we're seeing Jody Jody, Roger, and Backwash again, this time also joined by Dream Crusher, which I'm super pumped for. In March, we're seeing Always, which is really exciting. Their new album will translate amazingly live, I can tell. Then a couple days later, we're seeing Wise Blood, which I can only assume will be gorgeous. April, I'm finally getting to see 100 gecs after having 4 shows I've tried to go to canceled. At this point, all of my friends have seen them, and I'm sitting here as the one who got them all into them and having not seen the band. Machine Girl is also opening, which I'm pumped for. In May, we're seeing the post-punk band Shame, and then in June is a show that would make both current me and 15-year-old me scream for joy. I'm finally getting to see Paramore for my birthday, going to Toronto for the first time. Block Party and Genesis Owusu are also playing, and I could not be more excited. The festival next year has not had a lineup announced yet, but Shania Twain has been revealed, which is incredibly funny. And I hope to go to the Montreal Festival Osheaga for the first time in 2023, which has had Kendrick Lamar and Billie Eilish confirmed as headliners. And I'm pumped for Kendrick, and also Billie Eilish will be fun. And finally, in September is what I can only assume will be the best week of my life. My partner, a few friends, and I are driving down to Toronto on the 18th to see Death Grips, who I never thought I'd get to see in my life. We're gonna stay the night there, and then the next day, my partner and I are flying down to New York for both of our first times there. And then on the 20th, we're seeing the Postal Service and Death Cab for Cutie on the 20th anniversary tour of their 2 best albums. 2 albums that are incredibly important to our relationship together. It still blows my mind that we're going to that. I'll be making an update video at the beginning of next year, hopefully talking about how all these shows went, as well as any others we might happen to go to. But for now, I hope you liked this little diversion from my regular content to talk about something more casual and fun for me. My channel has been popping off hard recently, so I'm trying to make the best out of that by being as consistent as possible and dropping as many videos as I can. So shout out to you guys. You're making sure that I keep having the drive to do what I love, which is make these videos. Special shout out to my patrons as usual. That Discord has been really going off, and I'd love to have more people in there. So if you want in, all it takes is a one-time $3 Patreon sub. and you can join in on the fun. Thanks for watching as usual. I'll see you all very soon.